The flight of dreams and the storm of reality. The airport buzzed with the usual chaotic symphony of travelers hurrying to their destinations. Announcements echoed through the vast terminal, guiding passengers to their gates, while the rhythmic clatter of luggage wheels rolling against the polished floor added to the background noise. The scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air, mingling with the nervous excitement of families, businessmen, and adventurers waiting for their flights. Amelia stood in line at the boarding gate, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and exhaustion. This flight was not just a journey from one place to another. It was a symbol of resilience, sacrifice, and a mother's unwavering love. For months, she had worked tirelessly, saving every penny to give her son, Liam, the experience of a lifetime. A vacation, a simple concept for many, but for Amelia, it was a gift beyond monetary value. Liam, a bright-eyed 6-year-old, stood beside her, clutching his small green backpack tightly. His tiny fingers gripped the straps as he bounced on his feet, his excitement barely contained. This was his first time flying, and his mind was filled with the endless possibilities that awaited him in the sky. "Mom, do you think we'll fly so high that we can touch the stars?" he asked, his voice bubbling with enthusiasm. Amelia chuckled, ruffling his curly hair. "Not quite, sweetheart, but we'll be up close to the clouds. It's going to be magical." Liam's eyes widened. "Can I take a picture of the clouds? What if I see a bird flying next to us?" She smiled at his innocent wonder. "Of course. You can take as many pictures as you want." The boarding announcement crackled through the speakers, signaling their turn to enter the aircraft. Amelia adjusted the strap of her carry-on bag and took Liam's hand. Together, they walked down the jet bridge, each step bringing them closer to the adventure Amelia had promised her son. The moment they stepped onto the plane, Liam's curiosity exploded. He turned his head in every direction, eyes darting from the glowing seatbelt signs to the flight attendants moving gracefully through the aisles. He marveled at the overhead compartments, the neatly arranged seats, and the small round windows that framed the vast blue sky. "Wow, Mom, it's like a spaceship," he whispered excitedly. Amelia laughed softly. "It sure is, baby." They found their seats in the middle row. Amelia helped Liam get settled by the window, buckling his seatbelt before doing the same for herself. The hum of the aircraft engines vibrated beneath their feet as passengers continued to board, their voices blending into the gentle murmur of pre-flight chatter. As they waited for takeoff, Liam couldn't resist peeking into the aisle, his small frame leaning forward to catch a better glimpse of the activity happening around him. His fascination was pure, innocent, just a child's eagerness to absorb the magic of his first flight. But in that fleeting moment of innocent curiosity, a cold voice sliced through the warm atmosphere. "Sit back properly. This isn't a playground." The words, sharp and devoid of kindness, struck like a thunderclap. The joyful hum of the cabin stilled as heads turned toward the source of the voice. A flight attendant stood just a few feet away, her arms crossed tightly against her uniform, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her name tag gleamed under the cabin lights. Caroline. Liam flinched, his small body recoiling from the sudden reprimand. His wide brown eyes, once filled with wonder, now brimmed with confusion and fear. He sank into his seat, his tiny hands gripping the armrests as if trying to disappear. Amelia's heart clenched. She had spent years shielding her son from the harshness of the world, ensuring that he knew kindness before cruelty. And yet here, in what was supposed to be a moment of joy, Liam had been met with undeserved scorn. With a calm but firm voice, Amelia turned to Caroline. "Excuse me, but he's just a child. This is his first time flying." And he was only looking around. Caroline's eyes remained cold. "Curious or not, he needs to sit properly. It's a safety issue, and we don't have time to play babysitter." The words stung more than they should have. They weren't just a reminder of safety. They carried an unnecessary edge, a dismissal, as if Liam's excitement was an inconvenience rather than a joy to be nurtured. The tension in the cabin thickened. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, a few exchanging silent glances of disapproval. A woman across the aisle pursed her lips, her brows furrowing in dismay. A man in the row ahead shook his head slightly, but no one spoke. Amelia inhaled deeply, keeping her composure. "I understand safety is important, but there's no need to speak to him like that." Caroline's expression didn't soften. If anything, her irritation deepened. "I'm just doing my job," she snapped before turning on her heel and striding down the aisle. The moment she left, Amelia turned to Liam. His head was lowered, his lower lip quivering as he blinked back tears. "Did I do something bad, Mom?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Amelia's heart ached. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "No, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong." But the damage had been done. The light in Liam's eyes had dimmed, his excitement dulled by the unnecessary harshness of a stranger's words. As the plane prepared for takeoff, a different kind of turbulence brewed in the hearts of the passengers who had witnessed the exchange. Some turned back to their books or devices, trying to shake off the discomfort, while others stole glances at Amelia and Liam, silently acknowledging the unfairness of what had just transpired. In the first-class cabin, a man in a crisp suit lowered his coffee cup, his sharp eyes narrowing as he observed the scene from a distance. William Harris, the CEO of the airline, had watched everything unfold. His jaw tightened. Caroline had made a mistake, a serious one, and he was about to make sure she faced the consequences, the echoes of injustice. The aircraft hummed steadily as it taxied onto the runway, but the tension inside the cabin remained thick, pressing down on the passengers like an invisible weight. The echoes of Caroline's harsh reprimand lingered, hanging in the air like an unspoken accusation. Liam sat in his seat, small and subdued, his tiny fingers gripping the armrest as though trying to anchor himself. The excitement that had once sparkled in his eyes had faded into confusion and quiet hurt. Amelia watched her son, her heart aching. She wanted to reach into his mind, pull out the pain, and replace it with the joy he deserved. The injustice of it all burned inside her. She had fought for everything in her life, every penny she had saved, every moment she had worked overtime, all to give Liam a taste of happiness. And in an instant, a careless woman with too much authority and too little empathy had shattered that moment. The passengers around her remained silent, but the discomfort in their eyes spoke volumes. They had seen what had happened, but like so many instances of injustice in the world, they let it pass, unwilling to invite conflict into their journey. But someone else had seen it too, and he wasn't willing to let it slide. A decision is made. In first class, William Harris, the CEO of the airline, set down his coffee cup with deliberate calm. His piercing gaze had followed the entire interaction, absorbing every detail with meticulous precision. He wasn't just an executive in charge of operations. He was a man who believed in the integrity of his airline. This was unacceptable. He adjusted his cufflinks, his mind already formulating a plan. He had seen good employees, and he had seen bad ones. Caroline, she was the latter. This wasn't just about customer service. It was about respect, about ensuring that every passenger, no matter their background, their class, or their age, was treated with dignity. William turned to his assistant, Olivia, who had also witnessed the exchange. "Find out who that flight attendant is," he said, his voice low but firm. Olivia nodded, already tapping on her tablet. "Caroline Mitchell. She's been with the airline for 8 years. She glanced up hesitantly. But this isn't her first complaint. William's jaw tightened. "How many?" Olivia hesitated. "Over a dozen in the past 2 years alone." That was all the confirmation he needed. "She's done," William said simply. "But sir, she's mid-flight," Olivia reminded him. "She doesn't know it yet," he replied. "But by the time we land, she won't be wearing that uniform ever again." He stood up. The first-class passengers stole glances at him, sensing something significant was happening. With steady, authoritative steps, He made his way toward economy class. The cabin falls silent. As the aircraft finally ascended into the sky, Caroline walked briskly through the aisles, ensuring that the passengers had their seatbelts fastened. She moved robotically, without warmth. She was used to her job, used to enforcing rules without considering the human element behind them. She wasn't expecting the CEO to suddenly appear in the economy section. The moment William Harris entered, the atmosphere changed. Passengers sat up straighter. Some whispered amongst themselves. Others simply watched. He walked with purpose, his gaze locking onto Caroline, who had just turned around. She froze, momentarily startled. Then, recognition dawned in her eyes, followed immediately by panic. "Yes, sir," she stammered, her professional mask slipping for the first time. William stopped directly in front of her. The silence was deafening. The passengers held their breath. Even Amelia and Liam, still lost in their moment of quiet pain, looked up in surprise. William's gaze was unwavering, his presence powerful, commanding. "Miss Mitchell," he began, his voice even, controlled. "We need to talk." Caroline swallowed hard. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the cabin pressing down on her. She forced herself to straighten her posture, trying to regain control. "Of course, sir. May I ask what this is regarding?" William's expression remained impassive, but his tone was like steel. "Your recent interaction with this passenger," he said, gesturing subtly toward Amelia and Liam. Caroline's eyes darted to them, her panic deepening. "I was simply enforcing safety regulations," she replied, her voice defensive. William didn't blink. "No," he said flatly. "You were humiliating a child." The words cut through the cabin like a blade. Several passengers nodded subtly. Others just stared, waiting. Caroline felt her breath hitch. "Save it," William interrupted. He was done listening to excuses. "We'll discuss your future with this airline when we land. Until then, I suggest you conduct yourself with the level of professionalism that is actually expected of someone in your position." Caroline's face drained of color. She knew what that meant. She was finished. William turned his gaze toward Amelia and Liam. The little boy still looked uncertain, his small body curled inward. Amelia's expression was a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. William knelt down, meeting Liam's gaze directly. "Hey, kid," he said, his tone gentler now. Liam blinked. "Hi," he said softly. "You know, curiosity is a really good thing," William said, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Smart people ask a lot of questions. You didn't do anything wrong today. Not one thing." Liam hesitated. "I didn't." William shook his head. "Nope. And don't let anyone ever make you feel like you did." A small smile finally crept back onto Liam's face. Amelia swallowed the lump in her throat, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. William nodded, then stood up. His work here wasn't done. But Caroline's was. The fall of Caroline Mitchell. The rest of the flight carried an unshakable tension, but Caroline had lost her power. She moved through the aisles like a ghost, avoiding eye contact. She knew that by the time they landed, she wouldn't be putting on this uniform again. As the plane made its final descent, she felt the whispers of the passengers around her. She had made her own reputation, and now she was reaping the consequences. When the wheels touched down, William wasted no time. By the time the passengers began disembarking, Caroline was called over the intercom. She was to report immediately to HR. As she walked off the plane, her posture stiff, the truth of her mistake finally settled in. This wasn't just a bad day at work. This was the end of her career. Meanwhile, Liam held tightly to his mother's hand as they exited the plane. His spirit, though bruised, had been lifted by the kindness of a stranger who had stood up for him. "Mom?" he asked quietly as they walked through the bustling airport. "Yes, sweetheart. Can we still touch the clouds one day?" Amelia smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. "One day, Liam. One day we will. And with that, they walked forward, leaving behind the storm they had weathered. But for Caroline, the storm had only just begun. The weight of consequence and the spark of redemption. A world watching. As the passengers disembarked, the air inside the terminal was thick with hushed conversations. Word of what had happened mid-flight had already begun to spread. A few travelers stole glances at Caroline as she walked stiffly toward the airline's internal offices, her expression frozen somewhere between fear and disbelief. It hadn't truly sunk in yet. She had spent the last 8 years in the skies, enforcing the rules, ensuring passengers obeyed safety regulations. But never, not once, had she considered how she had been perceived. She wasn't a protector of safety. She was an enforcer of control. And today, control had slipped through her fingers. The murmurs of the passengers followed her as she made her way down the private hallway leading to the airline's HR office. They weren't speaking to her, but she could feel their words digging into her skin like thorns. That flight attendant was awful. Poor kid. She was so rude. I'm glad she got what was coming to her. You saw the CEO, right? She's done for. Caroline's breathing grew shallow as she reached the frosted glass door of the HR conference room. She hesitated before pushing it open. Inside, William Harris sat at the head of a polished wooden table, his expression unreadable. 2 members of the airline's human resources department sat beside him, their faces drawn with quiet professionalism. A thick file sat in front of them. Caroline knew what it was. Her record, her past mistakes, the passengers who had complained, the moments she had brushed off as insignificant. Now, those moments had become the foundation of her downfall. She took a deep breath and sat down. The reckoning. William wasted no time. Caroline, he began, his voice measured. Do you understand why you're here? She swallowed hard, keeping her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I assume it's about the incident with the child on today's flight. William's eyes remained steady. It's not just about today. One of the HR representatives flipped open the file, scanning the pages. Over the past 2 years, we have received 13 formal complaints about your behavior toward passengers. Many of these involve you being unnecessarily harsh, dismissive, or aggressive. Caroline felt a lump form in her throat. She had known there were complaints. Who didn't get complaints in this job? But she had assumed they were just a formality, something swept under the rug. She had never thought they would come back to haunt her like this. The HR rep continued. In some cases, your behavior was excused as stress-related. In others, you were given a verbal warning. But today's incident, publicly reprimanding a 6-year-old child in a way that frightened him, has forced us to reassess your role at this airline. Caroline's hands trembled slightly as she clenched them together. I was just enforcing safety regulations, she tried again. William's gaze hardened. No, he said simply. You were humiliating a child. The room went silent. The weight of his words settled over her. She opened her mouth, but no excuse came. Because he was right. She had humiliated a child. For what? For leaning forward in curiosity. For being excited. For being 6 years old. Her stomach churned with unease. The HR representative cleared her throat. Caroline, effective immediately, we are placing you on an indefinite suspension. Pending further review, your employment with this airline will be terminated. Caroline felt as if the floor had been pulled out from under her. She had expected discipline, maybe a warning, maybe mandatory training, but termination. She had given years of her life to this job. And now, all of it was disappearing in an instant. She started, but she didn't know how to finish. For the first time, words failed her. A mother's strength. While Caroline sat in the cold, lifeless conference room, on the other side of the airport, Amelia and Liam were finding their footing again. They had retrieved their luggage and stepped into the bustling arrival hall, where a wave of new passengers rushed toward security. But Amelia could still feel the emotional weight of what had happened on the flight pressing against her. She looked down at Liam, who clutched her hand tightly. His usual chatter had been replaced by quiet thoughtfulness. She crouched down beside him, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "Are you okay, baby?" she asked gently. Liam nodded but didn't say much. Amelia knew her son. He was smart, smarter than people gave him credit for. She could see it in his eyes. He was processing. "How did you feel when the flight attendant yelled at you?" she asked softly. Liam hesitated before answering. "I felt small." Amelia's heart clenched. Liam looked up at her, searching her face. "Did I do something wrong, Mom?" She pulled him into a hug, wrapping her arms around his tiny frame. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Some people just don't know how to be kind." He pressed his face into her shoulder, holding onto her tightly. Amelia closed her eyes. She had spent so long protecting him from the world, but today the world had crept into his life anyway. She wouldn't let it happen again. The turning point. As Caroline left the conference room, the full reality of what had happened hit her. She had lost her job, and maybe, just maybe, she had deserved it. She wandered through the airport, lost in thought, her mind replaying the moment over and over again. She could still see Liam's wide, fearful eyes. She could still hear the whispers of the passengers who had judged her. For years, she had told herself she was just doing her job. But now, she wasn't so sure. Her feet carried her toward the baggage claim area, where she suddenly stopped short. There, standing near the exit, was Amelia and Liam. She watched as Amelia knelt in front of her son, tucking a loose curl behind his ear, whispering words of comfort. For the first time in a long time, Caroline saw something she had been blind to before. She saw the weight of her words. She saw the damage she had done. And for the first time in years, she felt something unexpected. Regret. Before she could think too much about it, she stepped forward. Amelia looked up, her eyes narrowing as Caroline approached. She didn't speak. She just waited. Caroline hesitated. Then, in a voice softer than anyone had ever heard from her before, she said, "I'm sorry." The words felt foreign in her mouth. Liam blinked up at her, his small fingers still clutching his mother's hand. Amelia's expression remained unreadable. But she didn't walk away. Caroline swallowed. I didn't realize. I thought I was just following the rules. But I was wrong. I hurt you. And I hurt him." Liam looked up at his mother, then back at Caroline. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, Amelia exhaled. She didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't okay. But she nodded. A small, hesitant nod. A beginning. And for the first time in her entire career, Caroline felt lighter. A lesson in humanity. The weight of words. The airport terminal bustled around them. Families greeting loved ones, hurried travelers rushing to their next destination. But in that moment, time stood still. Caroline stood before Amelia and Liam, the echo of her apology hanging in the air. Amelia's arms were still wrapped protectively around her son, her posture rigid, wary. Her silence wasn't one of forgiveness. It was one of assessment. She was trying to measure the sincerity in Caroline's words, to determine whether this was a true moment of change or just another hollow attempt at damage control. Caroline, for the first time in years, felt exposed. She had spent so long building walls around herself, convincing herself that passengers were just names on a manifest, that her job was about order and control, not kindness. But today, those walls had crumbled, and now she was standing in the aftermath, unsure of what to do next. Caroline hesitated. She had spent years being authoritative, but she had never really learned to be vulnerable. She looked down at Liam, the child who had done nothing but be excited, a child she had reduced to tears. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said finally, voice lower now. "I just wanted you to know that I was wrong." Amelia exhaled, a slow, measured breath. She wasn't ready to let this go. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But Liam Liam was still just a child, and children, unlike adults, didn't carry grudges in the same way. He blinked up at Caroline. "You're not mad at me anymore?" he asked, his voice small. Caroline's chest tightened. "I was never mad at you," she admitted. I was wrong." Liam stared at her for a moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. It wasn't an invitation for friendship. It wasn't instant forgiveness. But it was acknowledgement. And for Caroline, that was more than she deserved. The reflection of a lifetime. As Caroline walked away, the weight of the encounter still clinging to her, she found herself questioning everything. The past 8 years of her life had been dedicated to this airline. She had followed the rules, done her job, upheld safety protocols. But somewhere along the way, she had lost sight of what truly mattered. It wasn't about following the rules. It was about people. It was about how you made them feel. For years, she had assumed she was good at her job. But today, she realized the truth. She hadn't been a flight attendant. She had been an enforcer. And now she wasn't even that. She had been suspended, likely fired. The uniform that had once felt like armor now felt like a prison she had willingly stepped into. And for the first time in her career, she found herself asking, what if I was never meant to do this at all? Amelia's unfinished battle. Back in the terminal, Amelia squeezed Liam's hand as they made their way toward the baggage claim. But inside, she was still burning. She had spent years preparing her son for the world, teaching him that he was worthy of respect, that his voice mattered. And in a single moment, someone like Caroline had threatened to unravel all of that. It wasn't just about the flight. It was about the pattern. The pattern of people assuming they could speak to her child however they wanted. The pattern of people dismissing innocence as inconvenience. And today, someone in power had finally stood up and said no. William Harris, the CEO, the man who had changed the course of that flight with a single decision. Amelia wasn't done fighting yet. She needed to speak to him. So instead of heading toward the taxi stand, she turned in the direction of the airline's executive offices. Liam looked up at her, confused. "Where are we going, Mom?" Amelia squeezed his hand. "To make sure this never happens again." The CEO who watched everything. William Harris sat in his office, staring out at the tarmac. His assistant, Olivia, stood beside him, tablet in hand. "Well," Olivia said, "that was quite a flight." William didn't answer immediately. He had spent the entire drive from the airport to the airline headquarters thinking. It had been a small moment. Just one flight. Just one child. But the impact of it rippled outward. "You know," William said finally, "I started this job believing customer service was about efficiency, about moving people from one place to another as smoothly as possible." He exhaled. "But I was wrong." Olivia frowned slightly. "Sir." William turned away from the window. "It's not about efficiency. It's about experience. People don't just remember their destination. They remember how they felt getting there." He shook his head. "That child will remember today for the rest of his life. That's not the kind of memory we should be creating." Olivia hesitated. "So what do we do?" William's gaze hardened. "We change." The meeting that changed everything. When Amelia arrived at the executive offices, she didn't expect to be let in. But when she asked for William Harris, his assistant raised an eyebrow, made a quick call, and waved her through. Inside, William stood as she entered. He wasn't the untouchable CEO she had expected. He wasn't surrounded by board members or legal teams. He was just a man. And today, he had been a man who made the right choice. "Miss Amelia," he said, offering his hand. "I was hoping I'd get the chance to speak with you." Amelia hesitated before shaking it. She had fought battles in her life. She had been dismissed, ignored, overlooked. But this man, this powerful man, was meeting her eye, listening to her words. It wasn't a battle today. It was a conversation. "I just wanted to say thank you," Amelia said, her voice steady. For what you did on the plane. William nodded. I wish I had done it sooner. She studied him. You know, this kind of thing happens more often than people want to admit, especially to children like mine. William's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what she meant. He had seen it before, and today he had been forced to confront it. I can't change the past, William said finally, but I can change the future. He motioned for her to sit. Tell me what needs to change. And for the first time in her life, Amelia was being asked, not told, how things should be done. A flight that echoed beyond the sky. By the time Amelia and Liam finally left the airport that day, something inside her felt lighter. She had walked in feeling powerless. She had walked out feeling like she had made a difference. William Harris wasn't just another suit in an office. He had listened. He had acted. And because of him, because of one moment of standing up instead of staying silent, things would change. As she lifted Liam into the backseat of their taxi, he looked up at her with bright, questioning eyes. Mom. Yes, baby. Do you think next time we fly, it'll be better? Amelia smiled. Not just for Liam, not just for herself, but for every person who would come after them. Yes, she whispered. I think it will. The ripple effect of change. The awakening of a system. As Amelia left the executive offices, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. She had walked into that meeting not expecting much. She had spent years knowing that people like her, single mothers, black women, working-class travelers, weren't always heard. But today, the most powerful man in the airline had listened. Not just out of duty, but out of understanding. As she held Liam's small hand in hers, she knew that this was bigger than them. This wasn't just about one flight or one flight attendant. This was about an entire system that needed to change. William's mission begins. Back in his office, William Harris remained at his desk, staring at the notes Olivia had taken from the meeting. His conversation with Amelia had unsettled him, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him question everything he thought he understood about his company. He had spent years focusing on profit margins, efficiency, and logistics, but he had never truly examined the experience from the eyes of the passengers, from the eyes of people like Amelia, from the eyes of children like Liam. The harsh reality was that today's incident wasn't an anomaly. It was a symptom of a deeper problem. And now he had to fix it. His intercom buzzed, breaking his thoughts. Sir, Olivia's voice came through. I've gathered the reports on previous customer complaints, just as you requested. William sat up straighter. And there was a pause. There's a pattern, Olivia admitted. Passengers of color, families, first-time flyers, they're the ones who get the most negative interactions with staff. William closed his eyes for a moment. He already knew. He had seen it before. But today was different. Today, he wasn't just observing it. He was responsible for fixing it. All right, he said, his voice firm. We're implementing a mandatory reform program for all flight attendants. Olivia hesitated. A reform program? Yes. Customer service training isn't enough. We need something deeper, a full retraining initiative focused on empathy, diversity, and human interaction. She nodded, quickly taking notes. I'll start working on it right away. Good, William said. And Olivia? Yes, sir. I want to personally oversee the first training session. Olivia's eyes widened slightly. You want to be there? William nodded. If we're going to change the way we treat people, it has to start from the top. Caroline faces the aftermath. While William was preparing to change the future of the airline, Caroline was sitting in a different kind of meeting, one that would decide her fate. She sat across from a disciplinary panel, HR representatives, senior staff members, and a legal advisor. The weight of her past mistakes sat heavy in the file before them. The HR director, an older woman with a sharp gaze, leaned forward. Miss Mitchell, Do you have anything to say for yourself? Caroline's instinct was to defend herself, to push back, to say it wasn't her fault. But as she opened her mouth, she realized she couldn't. Because today, she knew the truth. She had done this to herself. Slowly, she exhaled. No excuses, she said, her voice softer than ever before. I messed up. I let my frustration control me. And I hurt that child. The panel exchanged glances. This wasn't the usual Caroline, the defensive, sharp-tongued employee who always justified her actions. This was a woman facing her own flaws. The HR director folded her hands on the table. The truth is, Caroline, your behavior has been a repeated problem for years. We've overlooked things before, but this time we can't. Caroline nodded. I understand. She braced herself for the worst. But then, something unexpected happened. William Harris walked in. The entire room stiffened. He was not supposed to be here. Caroline's stomach twisted as he took a seat at the head of the table. But instead of looking at her with anger or judgment, he simply looked thoughtful. I've been reviewing Caroline's history, William said, setting down a file. And I believe we need to make a decision that isn't just about punishment, but about growth. The HR director frowned. Sir. William met Caroline's gaze. Caroline, do you want to change? Caroline blinked. What? I'm not asking if you're sorry, William clarified. I'm asking if you're willing to do the work to fix the way you treat people. Caroline hesitated. The answer should have been easy. She had lost everything. This job was all she had. But for the first time, she wasn't sure if she deserved it. I don't know if I can, she admitted quietly. William's expression didn't change. I'll give you a choice, he said. You can accept your termination, walk away, and find a new path. Or you can enter a 6-month reformation program, intensive training, therapy, supervised work, and direct mentorship. Caroline's throat tightened. It was an offer of redemption. A second chance. She could take it, or she could run. Caroline closed her eyes for a moment. Then she took a deep breath and said, I'll do it. William nodded. Then let's get started. A new beginning for all. Over the next several months, changes swept through the airline. Flight attendants went through rigorous empathy training, learning how to treat every passenger with dignity and respect. Supervisors monitored customer interactions, ensuring that no passenger felt unwelcome on any flight. And William? He personally ensured that Amelia's words had not been ignored. Her complaints had sparked something bigger than just one flight. They had changed the culture of an entire company. As for Caroline, she struggled. She fought against old habits, but she didn't quit. And 6 months later, when she stepped onto a plane again, this time as a flight attendant who had finally learned the value of kindness, she felt something she had never felt before. Peace. A flight that would never be forgotten. 6 months after that fateful flight, Amelia and Liam boarded another plane. This time, there was no tension, no fear, just excitement. Liam held onto his backpack, smiling at everything around him. Are we going to touch the clouds this time, Mom? He asked. Amelia smiled and kissed his forehead. Maybe, baby. Just then, a flight attendant passed by. She smiled warmly at them. And for a moment, Amelia could have sworn she recognized her, because it was Caroline. But this time, she was different. And this time, she treated them the way they always should have been treated, with respect, with kindness, with humanity. And as the plane soared into the sky, Amelia finally believed it. Things had changed, because one voice had been enough to start a revolution, because one flight had been enough to transform an entire industry, because no matter how high a plane could fly, humanity had to soar even higher. The rebirth of a journey. 6 months later, a different flight, a different world. The airport still buzzed with the same familiar chaos, hurried footsteps, last-minute announcements, the occasional child laughing as their parents juggled luggage and boarding passes. But for Amelia and Liam, today felt different. Today, they were flying again. This time, it wasn't about proving a point or facing an unexpected battle. This time, it was simply about enjoying the journey. As they approached the check-in counter, Amelia glanced down at her son. Liam's eyes were just as curious and bright as before, but now they held something else. Confidence. No fear, no hesitation, just excitement. "Mom, do you think this time I can see the whole world from up there?" Liam asked, pointing toward the vast sky beyond the terminal windows. Amelia chuckled, ruffling his curls. "I think you'll see more than you ever imagined." The flight was boarding soon. They made their way to the gate, past bustling crowds of travelers, past flight attendants greeting passengers with warm smiles. But this time, something was different. The air felt lighter. There was no tension, no stiffness, no wary glances. Amelia's heart swelled with quiet relief. Change was a slow process, but today, she could feel it. The cabin that no longer held fear. As they entered the plane, Amelia instinctively tensed for a moment. Old habits were hard to shake. Would it be the same as before? Would someone tell Liam to sit down too harshly? Would someone dismiss him just for being an eager little boy? But as she looked around, she noticed something immediately. The flight attendants weren't just performing their jobs. They were engaging with passengers differently. A young woman in uniform knelt beside an elderly couple, patiently helping them with their seatbelts. Another was chatting with a family, explaining in a gentle, friendly way how the emergency exits worked. And then, "Mom." Liam tugged at her sleeve, his voice quiet with surprise. She followed his gaze. A flight attendant was standing just a few feet away. She looked familiar. Caroline. But not the Caroline they had met 6 months ago. This was someone new. Gone was the cold, rigid posture. Gone was the sharp, indifferent tone. In its place was a woman who carried herself differently. She was watching the passengers, not with scrutiny, but with a sense of duty, of awareness. Then, as if sensing their gaze, she turned. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Caroline did something Amelia never thought she'd see. She smiled. It wasn't forced. It wasn't a mask. It was genuine. And when she finally stepped toward them, there was no tension, no dread, only understanding. "Welcome aboard," Caroline said warmly, kneeling down slightly so she could meet Liam's eyes. "Are you excited for today's flight?" Liam blinked in surprise. Then he nodded, grinning. "I want to see the clouds again." Caroline chuckled. "You know what? I think you're going to see the best clouds this time." She handed him a small wing-shaped pin, the kind pilots gave to young travelers. "For our bravest passengers," she said. Liam gasped, holding the pin like it was a treasure. "I get to be a pilot." Caroline smiled. "Absolutely." Amelia watched the exchange, her heart caught between shock and gratitude. This wasn't just an apology. This was growth. Caroline met Amelia's gaze, her expression quieter now. "Can I help you with anything today, Ms. Amelia?" Amelia studied her for a long moment. Then, with a small nod, she simply said, "No, I think we're going to be just fine." The woman who chose change. After the passengers had settled in, Caroline stood near the galley, taking a steadying breath. The old her would have dreaded this flight. The new her, she felt ready. 6 months ago, she had stood in this exact aisle, believing she was doing her job well. Until she had been forced to see the truth. Until a child's fear had shown her how much she had lost sight of. Until a CEO had given her a choice, to leave or to learn. And she had chosen to learn. It hadn't been easy. The reformation program had forced her to unravel everything she thought she knew about her job. She had sat through customer empathy courses, had been put through real-time training scenarios, had even been assigned to community service work, all to learn how to listen. She had spoken to families, to children, to passengers just like Amelia. And she had learned something that no rulebook had ever taught her. People don't remember what you do. They remember how you make them feel. Today, she wasn't just a flight attendant. She was a guardian of the journey. And she would never forget that again. William Harris' legacy. Back in the airline's corporate office, William Harris sat with a finalized report on his desk. It was the official 6-month review of the new company policies. Passenger satisfaction rates sky high, complaints about flight attendants at an all-time low. Incidents like Caroline's past behavior practically non-existent. William exhaled, running a hand over his face. He had spent his entire career thinking leadership was about efficiency. But today, he understood that true leadership wasn't just about running an airline. It was about making sure every single passenger felt safe, respected, and welcomed. He picked up his pen and scribbled one final note in the margins of the report. This is not the end of our work. This is just the beginning. Then he smiled. Because for the first time, he wasn't just running a business. He was changing lives. A flight that defined the future. As the plane soared above the clouds, Liam pressed his face against the window. The world stretched out beneath him, endless and bright. Amelia reached over, squeezing his hand gently. "Are you happy, baby?" Liam grinned. "Yeah. This time, it's really fun." Amelia let out a quiet sigh of relief. No tension, no fear, just joy. And as she looked around at the flight attendants treating passengers with warmth, she knew the world had changed just a little bit that day on their first flight. And today, they were flying in that better world. Because kindness takes flight the moment we choose to let it. The journey that changed everything. The view from above. The plane soared through the vast expanse of the sky, cutting effortlessly through soft clouds bathed in the golden hues of the setting sun. From his window seat, Liam gazed in wonder, his small hands pressed against the cool glass. For the first time, he wasn't afraid. He wasn't shrinking back in his seat, unsure if he was allowed to be curious, excited, and full of life. He was simply free. Amelia, sitting beside him, stole a glance at her son. He was smiling again. A smile that had dimmed after their last flight, but had returned now, stronger than ever. "Mom, look." Liam pointed excitedly. "The clouds look like marshmallows." Amelia chuckled. "I told you they'd be amazing." He turned to her, eyes sparkling. "This flight is different. Everyone is. Nice." Amelia nodded, her heart swelling. "Yes, sweetheart, it's different. Because people had changed. Because choices had been made. Because a fight that once felt like just another day had turned into a movement. And that movement had begun with them. The man who changed the skies." Back in his office high above the city, William Harris sat at his desk, scrolling through a final company-wide report. It had been 6 months since that defining moment. 6 months since Amelia and Liam's flight. 6 months since he stood up and said enough. 6 months since he made a choice that would shape the future of the airline industry. As he flipped through the numbers, he saw the results of his decision. Customer complaints, down by 82%. Employee morale, at an all-time high. Diversity and inclusion training completion rate, 100%. It wasn't just about numbers, though. It was about stories. Stories from passengers who felt seen. Stories from employees who felt valued. Stories from families like Amelia and Liam's, who now felt safe, welcomed, and respected. His assistant, Olivia, knocked gently on the door. "Sir, your next meeting is ready." William leaned back in his chair. "Which one?" "The new Flight Experience Initiative," Olivia said. "You're scheduled to speak with a panel of passengers today. We selected individuals who have seen the biggest changes firsthand." William's lips curved into a small smile. "Let's do it. Because this was only the beginning. The flight that inspired a nation, What had started as a single moment of confrontation had now grown into something bigger than anyone had imagined. It had started on one flight, with one child, with one voice. But today, it was being talked about worldwide. Social media had caught wind of the story. The passenger from Amelia's original flight had posted about it, and it had gone viral. Witnessed something incredible today. A CEO stood up against injustice, a mother protected her son, and an airline changed for the better. This is how we build a better world. The hashtags spread like wildfire. Hashtag change in the skies. Hashtag flying with respect. Hashtag every passenger matters. News outlets picked up the story, covering how a single incident had sparked reform. And before long, other airlines began following suit. New customer service policies, new empathy training for staff, new standards for treating passengers with dignity. And it had all started with a little boy who just wanted to see the clouds, the woman who found herself again. Caroline stood at the back of the plane, watching the cabin with new eyes. She had walked these aisles for years, but today, she saw something she had never seen before. People weren't just faces in seats anymore. They were people. People with stories, with dreams, with struggles, with families who loved them. And for the first time in her career, she felt proud of what she did. She had spent months in intensive training, therapy, and mentorship programs. There had been days when she wanted to quit, when she thought, maybe I'll never be better. But she had pushed through. Because William had given her a choice. Because Amelia had shown her grace. Because Liam had forgiven her, even when she didn't deserve it. And today, as she helped an elderly passenger find their seat, as she knelt beside a nervous child and assured them everything would be okay, she knew. She was different now. And she would never go back. Amelia's final stand. As the flight neared its destination, Amelia took a deep breath. She could feel the full circle moment approaching. She turned to Liam, brushing his hair out of his face. Baby, remember what we talked about? Liam nodded. That sometimes you have to speak up when things aren't right. Amelia smiled. That's right. And do you remember what happened when we did? Liam thought for a moment. Then his eyes lit up. Everything changed. Amelia kissed his forehead. Exactly. Before disembarking, she took a moment to approach Caroline. The flight attendant turned, hesitating when she saw Amelia. The past between them still existed, but today it felt like a lesson instead of a wound. Amelia extended her hand. Caroline stared at it for a moment, then, slowly, reached out and shook it. Neither of them said thank you. Neither of them said I'm sorry. Because they both already knew. And sometimes a handshake speaks louder than words. A world that chose to be better. By the time Amelia and Liam stepped off the plane, they weren't just leaving a flight. They were stepping into a new world. A world where airlines were changing. A world where CEOs were listening. A world where employees were learning. A world where passengers weren't invisible. And they had helped create it. Liam looked up at his mother, grinning. Can we fly again soon? Amelia smiled. Baby, we're going to fly wherever our dreams take us. And this time, she knew that the sky had finally made room for them. Because sometimes change doesn't start with a big movement. Sometimes change starts with a child who just wants to see the clouds. The end. Final message. The power of small moments. This story wasn't just about one child. It wasn't just about one flight attendant. It wasn't even just about one airline. This was a story about change. Real, tangible change that starts in the smallest moments. A single voice. A single action. A single decision. And yet that single moment can change the world. So next time you see something that isn't right, whether it's in a workplace, on a flight, in a classroom, or in your daily life, remember this story. Because your voice matters. Because kindness is power. Because sometimes justice takes flight in the most unexpected ways. And that is how one moment on a plane changed an entire industry.